Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astral Club. Today I'm going to tell you about some interesting experiences I had in the past of North America with woolly mammoths and Atlanteans. So this should be a good one. When I was a kid, I was very much interested, enraptured really, with dinosaurs. And I just read all the books about dinosaurs and watched the movies. I just loved the topic, such that I even had an astral projection where I saw creatures that looked a lot different than what I'd seen in my books. They were quicker, some of them had feathers, and they weren't the lumbering giants that I had seen in my books. When I got into my teens, I moved on from dinosaurs and started finding out about the megafauna that existed on Earth after the dinosaurs had long been dead. And especially reading, since I'm from the United States, reading about the megafauna that existed here in North America. Things like the woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, which we call smilodons, the woolly rhinoceros, cave and short-faced bears, the lions and dire wolves, to name a few. And these creatures also captured my imagination. Many years later, I decided to have a trip to check out some of these creatures, and most particularly I wanted to find woolly mammoths, because the idea of something like that roaming about North America just captured my attention. I also became interested in the myth of Atlantis, which Plato referred to as this semi-mythical kingdom that once existed near the Pillars of Hercules, he claimed. And it was supposedly this advanced civilization that had disappeared in some sort of disaster, flood, you name it. Now, I admit to being a bit skeptical about that because, there was lots of stories and myths about advanced civilizations, but there was a scarcity of information and proof. Now, over the years, a variety of strange monuments and Pumapuco, which is a town built out of very difficult to carve stone that presents people with mysteries as to how primitive people could have carved this stone. And then there's mysteries of the Sphinx and in other civilizations where we have tantalizing evidence that something may have existed. There may have been civilizations of humans that were more advanced than we know about. These people's history has been lost to the sands of time, and to perhaps ancient disasters. So, even though I had some skepticism about the Atlantean myths, I was still interested in it, and I think you'll find that this particular astral experience hit a couple of these interesting points for me, and perhaps you'll get something out of it as well. So the idea was, after I left my body, to shoot for somewhere around 50 to 60,000 years in the past, where I was sure I would be able to locate woolly mammoths. At the same time, while I was targeting that time zone, I was also targeting what I considered the life form of the woolly mammoth, keeping that picture in my mind. So it was kind of a dual type of targeting system. Well, I set off, and like usually happens in long time jumps, I blacked out. When I came to, I was hovering a few thousand feet off of the, away from the earth. I decided, as I usually do, to get some more distance, to get further up, to take a better look as to what is going on. So, as I flew much further up, I was able to look back at North America, my future home. And what I saw was a very different scene than what can be seen today. All of what would one day be Canada was covered in a glacial ice sheet. And this ice sheet had intruded down into what would once be, in the future, the United States. And it's difficult sometimes to be exact from high up because the states don't have the little lines on them that the maps do. But my best geographic estimate was the glacier proceeded down somewhere into Indiana, Ohio, and down through covering a good portion of the state of Pennsylvania. I decided then to get a much closer look. So I flew downwards trying to target a woolly mammoth life form, herd, what have you. I soared around for a bit when I noticed a large group of animals moving below me. As I descended, I nested in one of the very few trees that were around at that time. The ground looked very mushy, very swampy, marshy. There were herbs and wildflowers growing everywhere on the ground, so I imagine in this glacial period, this might be what passed for late spring or summer. It's obviously hard to say. I don't feel temperature, so I can't tell you how warm or cold it was, but based on what I saw, I would say it was probably, a little what we would consider a colder day, perhaps in fall, but would probably, was good enough for late spring or summer in this glacial period. As I was looking toward in front of me, I noticed a herd of very large woolly mammoths coming near my tree. I decided to descend at that point and stood briefly in front of the leader of this herd, which from my perch in the tree I could see was a few hundred individuals long, with adults and juveniles all together. And they were strung out in one long line. And the leader looked to be about twice my size in height. Being an average male, you can do the math yourself. This leader had very long and curved tusks and was the very image of that shaggy animal that I had seen in my books. So I was a little bit more relieved that my books were perhaps a little bit more accurate than my early dinosaur books had been. As a test, I decided to try to get the attention of this lead woolly mammoth, but no matter what I tried, even flying up to hover in front of it, I couldn't get its attention, which didn't surprise me. When I travel into the past, I'm normally an insubstantial ghost. I can't be seen by the life forms that I view. I can't be heard or touched or anything else. So I'm nothing but a ghost from the future from their standpoint, and so I wasn't observed. I decided to fly a little higher to get a better look at the herd, which, as I said, was kind of loosely strung out, probably over as much as half a mile. They seem to be taking their time, making their way up the grassland or the marshy land. And as I looked down at them, I could definitely see, though, that the adults were strung out in the front and in the back, and on the sides, kind of running guard duty. Because as I looked down further, I noticed there were some wolves, rather large wolves, that were ghosting this pack, perhaps waiting for some opportunity or other to pounce. I decided to continue flying around the area to see if I could see anything else of interest. And I was going to return back to the herd when I noticed below there was some struggle in a nearby very marshy area. And there I descended and found a juvenile woolly mammoth that seemed to be stuck in a marshy, muddy pool that it had perhaps gone to get some choice plants for lunch, but had lost its footing and had slipped in. I could tell that it was making noises, trying to summon help, but the pack was far enough away, and I imagine they were making some noise such that they obviously didn't hear him. I decided to descend and try to send some calming energy to this animal. As I had found out just before, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't touch him. He couldn't see me. So all I could do was just sit there and watch this poor animal struggle, completely helpless to aid him in any way. So I stayed there for a bit, but unfortunately his struggles were observed or were heard by some other creatures, which were the hovering pack of wolves. And they began to approach, completely ignoring me, even though once again I tried to wave my arms and tried to look mean, but they just ignored me, and the leader actually just walked right through me. So there was nothing that I could do. I didn't wish to watch what was going to happen, especially since I was completely helpless to do anything about it. So I, regrettably just flew into the air and left that poor young mammoth to its fate. I flew back to the herd, wondering whether the mother was even aware that her young one was no longer among the living. But I just decided to, continue observing the herd for a bit longer. I decided to begin time traveling again, this time going forward. And I would project myself a few thousand years or so, or 5,000 years or so into the future and stop just to see what was going on. I took a higher orbit so that I could look down on the continent. I would stop every few thousand years or sometimes 5,000 years, pretty much at random, looking down. And, I saw the glacier retreating, and then going forward again, retreating, going forward. And this happened time and again as the natural cycles of the Earth continued. I eventually decided to continue doing this procedure till I got to around 12 to 13,000 years ago. And when I arrived there, I could see that the glaciers had retreated all the way up to the very northern corner of Canada. And of course, Greenland was still covered. And so there obviously had been a sustained warming period. I decided to see if I could find any humans anywhere. I know there's a variety of theories about humans, but I believe that at this point in time I should be able to find some humans somewhere in the area. So I started scouting the area, and at first didn't really find any humans. Then I went out over the ocean and started scanning for the the feeling of human beings, the thoughts of human beings. When in the midst of my ocean crossing, I sensed that there were humans. So I descended towards this signal when I was surprised to see 6 ships beneath me. As I got closer, these ships were remarkable. They were bronze and gold in color, and they gave off metallic shines that reflected the sun. I was flabbergasted because I wasn't aware in any traditional histories of ships of that nature with metal, either composed of metal or having metal plating, had been in existence 12,000 years ago. So I obviously descended. And what I saw was, I believe, a fishing fleet. There, as I said before, there was 6 craft. As I got closer, I could see that they averaged around 150 feet long, which is about 45 meters, and somewhere around 30 feet wide, or around 9 meters. So pretty good sized vessels for this ancient time. And as I said, they were fishing with long nets, and they had sails. But what really surprised me, other than, of course, these metal ships being where they weren't supposed to be, was that there was a churning in the water behind each of these ships that kicked up a great amount of white water. So what I was seeing here was some sort of system that propelled these ships under power. 13,000 years ago? That seems unbelievable. I decided to land on one of the ships that, as I said, appeared to be fishing vessels that were dragging nets behind them. And what I found there on the deck were sailors. Their skin was deeply tanned, as sailors are typically to this day, being exposed to that amount of sun. They had what you might consider skirts around them, and other than that, were bare to the sun. I tried to get the attention of one of the sailors, but all he did was walk through me. So once again, I was just this disembodied ghost. I decided to do a light scan of the guy who just walked through me. After all, he just walked through me so I could walk through his mind a little bit. And what I saw was a simple sailor. His biggest concern was having a good catch of fish that he could take home. What was really interesting was that the home that I saw pictured in his mind was a seaside village in a island type country. And this country seemed to be more advanced than it should be. There were vehicles on this island, and there was even some form of helicopter which was able to fly about. I even saw a picture of it in his mind. What really got my attention then is I saw them beginning to pack some catches of fish into ice. Now today, that doesn't seem to be very remarkable, but this is 13,000 years ago. These are metal ships being propelled by some sort of mechanism, and they have ice. Where did they get ice? We can make ice nowadays. We have the proper machinery, but here they are able to do it as well. And they were packing fish in this ice for their voyage back to their home. So all of this was extremely interesting to me, as I think would be interesting to anyone. And obviously, the Atlantean myths started kicking around my head, I don't know what else to say. It was just pretty amazing. The sailors themselves kind of looked Middle Eastern, I guess you could say. But they were clean shaven with very little body hair. So I don't know what precisely their racial group could be classified as, but that's my best guess. Um, I decided to try to find their homeland, so I projected myself back up into the air and started progressing myself forward in time as well while I was traveling physically. And I did so slowly so I didn't lose consciousness. And I hadn't progressed very far in time when I saw a brilliant flash in the sky. Um, and the earth reverberated like a bell. So I got a better look from high above in the atmosphere of the earth. And I saw that there was a northwestern corner of Greenland that had been impacted by some sort of celestial body. There was an enormous fiery cloud that was arising from this enormous disaster. And inside it, there was all manner of fire and dust and ash and molten rock and you name it. And it started spreading out from Greenland over Canada and over the ocean. I decided to continue projecting a little bit forward in time, and when I stopped, there was a black cloud that surrounded the northern hemisphere, and it cast quite a bit of darkness over the southern as well. I descended briefly to see what was going on, and there must have been devastation because all I saw was evidence of burnings, of floods, of earthquakes, and other disasters. And I could only wonder to myself, I wonder what happened to my woolly mammoth friends, and I wonder what happened to my Atlantean sailors, and what had happened to their civilization with this type of disaster occurring. I was going to investigate further when I had the return signal come back to me strong, and I was pulled back into my body. That was that experience. It was very interesting, certainly. It affected me deeply, and I think it may point out some interesting facts of this pre-world. Certainly, we knew about woolly mammoths. That's not a surprise, but the fact that there was some civilization, let's call it Atlantean for lack of any other term, that had advanced technology to some extent, going back to over 13,000 years ago before this, at least before this disaster. I don't know if it was wiped out by that disaster, but I don't imagine it was helped by it. So certainly there's some interesting things there that I'm sure we could use to maybe put together some puzzles that our scientists have observed in the past. I hope you enjoyed that astral projection. If you did, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, hit that bell button, and why don't you give me a comment or a question. And as always, I will see you on the astral plane.